Welcome to the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone. Our telephone lines are open at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
Good morning. Welcome to the program. Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman with you this morning. And later on in the program, we'll be speaking to a faith-based group that believes that it's one's religious right to have an abortion. Really, it's a Christian group, a kind of a turn on what you would think a Christian group would actually stand for, from Faith Aloud. That would be the Reverend Dr. John Dorhauer. And we'll be speaking to him later on in the hour about that. Really interesting topic from that standpoint. Our number is 1-888-930-1787. 1-888-930-1787 is our talkback number. With us this morning, of course, as always in our studio, is Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's on the topic du jour for this morning, sir?
Well, we're going to talk about birth control and abortion. We always like to start off with our program by reminding everyone that we live in a fascist dictatorship. And if you're not aware of that, is you don't understand what a fascist dictatorship means. And because of our system of government education, I wouldn't be surprised if most of the population doesn't know what that means. We are lied to daily through the media, which is nothing but the propaganda arm of the government. And we are led to believe something which is completely untrue. It allows the government to enslave us. It allows the government to take us to war unnecessarily. And it does so for no other purpose than to aggrandize itself and to enslave the American people. A few little things just right off the top of my head. The income tax is an unconstitutional program. Does not exist to fund the government. It exists to enslave the American people. As we know well now that the government actually borrows more money than it gets from the personal income tax and will print up as much money as it needs in order to fund the agencies and foreign adventurism, which allows them to enslave the American people. The only reason the federal income tax exists is to enslave the American people by making the American people impoverished and by punishing those who are productive and successful. The system of public education does not exist to educate. It exists to create a group of slaves that are indoctrinated to believe that that government is benevolent and that the government is necessary. What the government guarantees is that the children are indoctrinated to believe the government is good and to create a very large underclass of unskilled, illiterate individuals who are beholden to government through welfare, food stamps, and other programs, Medicare and Medicaid as an example. Unless on Medicare and Medicaid, everyone is told that Medicare and Medicaid are government insurance programs which exist to guarantee access to the elderly and the poor. That is not what it exists for. Medicare and Medicaid exist for the sole purpose of taking the decision-making power of an individual's health care away from the individual and away from the physicians and hand it over to the government and its bureaucracy in order to empower the government and to funnel billions upon billions of dollars to friends, cronies, relatives, and contributors to politicians. Abortion. Few people, and this is our topic for today, not many, hardly any, and you're never taught this, the abortion is an outcropping of the eugenics movement that began at the earlier part of the 19th century. Eugenics is the philosophy that there are some people born superior to others. From that came the abortion movement and the birth control movement. It was based upon Thomas Robert Malthus's belief that the Earth had a finite level of resources, and that the population of the Earth could not exceed much more than 1 billion people. That there wouldn't be enough food, there wouldn't be enough resources, and therefore, since the population was limited by the environment, it was necessary to make sure that those that were human beings that progressed were of a certain class and a certain type. And so, amazingly enough, Thomas Malthus actually railed against vaccinations and antibiotics and all charities. He said that any attempt to salvage those of the inferior classes was counterproductive because it would allow inferior genes to be propagated, thus diluting the superior genes in society. That was picked up by, of course, Thomas Malthus was an economist. That was picked up by Francis Galton, who actually coined the term eugenics. Eugenics means good genes. Francis Galton was a mathematician, and he lived in the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century. And what he believed was that there were the same thing, that there were some genes or some races inherently superior to other races, and that for humans to progress as a society, that we had to change from animal behavior. We had to go along with animal behavior of survival of the fittest, in which only those with the best genes were allowed to propagate, and we ought to stop helping those with inferior genes from propagating in order for humankind to advance. Of course, he was the cousin of, guess who? Charles Darwin. Everyone believes that Charles Darwin was some naturalist going around the world in his ship and just for the sake of science itself. Balderdash. Charles Darwin came from the elitist class of society. His grandmother was the founder of Wedgwood, China, so he was extremely wealthy. He was the cousin of the eugenist Francis Galton. And what Charles Darwin was doing was trying to prove that there were some species superior to others, and that the species that survived were the ones who were best able to adapt to the environment in which they were living. However, what he didn't like was that people, being charitable and kind and merciful, were helping survive through charity, through health care, through sanitation and other methods in order to allow the poor to survive in society, that was diluting the gene pool in our society, and thus allowing inferiors to progress. Now, of course, Charles Darwin and Francis Galton considered all races of color to be inferior. But within the so-called white race, they even had a hierarchy there. And for those of you who are Irish and Italian, you'd be happy to know, I guess, that Charles Darwin thought you were at the bottom. That of the white races, that the Irish were the ones that were least, that should be prevented from reproducing because they were the least successful or the least able, the least of the white races, and next to them were the Italians. So I guess Charles Darwin didn't care much for Catholics, I suppose. Now, from that there was this woman that you're all aware of. Her name is Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a believer in eugenics. She believed in the superiority of one race over another. Margaret Sanger was a racist, she was a racist and anti-Semite. Her first birth control clinic was in the poor area in New York, where there were lots of blacks and Hispanics, and at that time Jews. Her goal was not to make the woman's life easier. Her goal was to reduce or eliminate the numbers of blacks, Jews, Hispanics, and the poor who were being, in her mind, produced to a far greater quantity than should be allowed by law. Of course, she surrounded her genocidal tendencies with the shroud of helping those people, but the truth comes out with her affiliation with the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler. The fact of the matter is that Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party looked upon Margaret Sanger and her group of eugenics as the founders of the entire eugenics movement, which of course was embraced by the Nazis. And of course we know what the Nazis did there. Now we need to understand. So there was many overtly pro-Nazi members of Margaret Sanger's board on her American Birth Control League. one of the most famous, if not the most famous, outside of Margaret Sanger herself, was an individual called Lothrop Stoddard, graduate of Harvard. No surprise there. Most graduates of Harvard are elitist and eugenists. And among things that he said was that now what do we know about superior individuals? We know that they exist and that they are due to heredity. That is a good beginning, but it would not get us very far unless we knew more along the same lines. Fortunately, we not only know that superiors tend to produce superior offspring, but that they produce such offspring according to natural laws, which can be determined statistically with a high degree of accuracy. Of course, the same is true of the production of inferiors. Theodore Stoddard, Lothrop Stoddard, graduate of Harvard, was very enamored by the Germans and what they were doing. And he wrote that he was he agreed entirely with the German program of eliminating Jews. He thought that was a good step. He wished that the United States would follow along the lines of the German Nazis. He actually lamented the fact that even though the eugenics movement began in the United States and United Kingdom, that the banner had been picked up more aggressively and successfully by the Germans. And so the connection between the Nazis and the eugenics movement in the United States was, of course, very strong. In fact, the first president of the Eugenics Society, a Dr. Rudin, R-U-D-I-N, was a Nazi, a Swiss-born Nazi, and he was the one who set all the theory of how the necessity to eliminate Jews and those of the underclass. He was the first president of a major eugenics society.
So these are things that I don't get how people today, if you talked about Planned Parenthood, they would have no idea. They wouldn't make the Margaret Sanger connection at all.
Well, as I said, we live in a world of lies. It was, as George Orwell said in his book 1984, it's the world of doublespeak and newspeak, where Planned Parenthood is considered that the Planned Parenthood is considered an organization for human rights and women's health care, when it exists for no other purpose than to eliminate blacks and Hispanics. And of course, that's where most of the abortions are done on minorities. Of course, the Jewish race has a significant number of abortions as well. I think they probably go more to the private sector since they've elevated themselves into a more affluent part of society. I do find very ironic, Rabbi, that in our society today, that Planned Parenthood, abortion, and birth control among our representatives is promoted mostly by those who belong to which groups? Blacks, Hispanics, and Jews. Are they not the biggest promoters of birth control in the United States, belonging to the party of birth control, the Democrat Party? I find it ironic and very sad that those groups that were targeted by Margaret Sanger, Lothrop Stoddard, and all the other eugenics in the United States and the rest of the world, that the groups that were actually targeted for elimination, Jews, Hispanics, blacks, and the poor, are the ones who are the biggest proponents of Planned Parenthood. That shows you how far we have deviated from the path of righteousness which our founding fathers thought that they had created in the United States. You know, let me just say one other thing here.
Yeah.
In the Declaration of Independence was the founding pillar of the country. What does it say? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Rabbi, don't you find it odd that in our society today, they try to paint the abortion issue as a peripheral issue of personal conscience, and they say what's important is not the issue of abortion, birth control, and life. What's important is Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, but where in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence is anything talked about Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, or even the means to create those programs? And they want to make the life issue, the pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-life issue, a peripheral issue based upon your own personal conscience, as if there were no right or wrong, as if there was no difference of no significance in a society between a society that was against abortion and a society that was pro-abortion. I find that amazing when the first most important thing that a human being has is life, which is what our founding fathers said in the Declaration of Independence, and that life cannot be taken without due process, as is said in the Constitution of the United States as one of our Bill of Rights, that life cannot be taken without due process, that we shunt that aside for things so important like Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps. That shows you how far we have, in the level of national consciousness, has deviated from the path set by us, by our founding fathers.
Well, I think the founding fathers did not have any idea or did not want to go down the direction at all of a welfare state, and it's exactly where we're going. We're going that, and they believe that it's a right. They believe that
no right can exist which benefits some by taking from others, because then what about the rights of those from whom something is taken? So clearly no right can exist which is preferential. Rights are natural to all human beings and are not preferential. Yet we treat rights today as being preferential.
When we come back, we'll be speaking more about this abortion debate and a Christian group that is, well, supporting it. We'll continue in a moment right here on the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone.
You are listening to the Talkback Radio Network. We hope you're being enriched by our program today. You may be listening via our archives or to our live broadcast. Dr. Gelman and Rabbi Rosenberg broadcast live on Thursdays from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern, 10 to 11 a.m. Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. You may call the show live during those times, toll free at 888-930-1787, 888-930-1787, or you can find us in the archives 24/7 at ironmicrophone.com.
If you're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan, like me, coming home can be harder than expected, but it turns out I wasn't alone. At IAVA.org, there's a free online community of thousands of vets who've got your back. Whether it's managing the transition home or everyday stuff like finding a nice sweater for my dog.
Sweater?
Okay, maybe not that. Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America is there for you. Join our community at IAVA.org.
We've got your back.
Brought to you by IAVA and the Ad Council. Dr. Lawrence Gelman is a South Texas-based physician and hospital administrator. His mission is to empower Americans with knowledge that will help change the direction of our country. Dr. Gelman has produced a series of DVDs with the facts on myriad political, social, and economic issues. At this time, he is so passionate about our country and the state of our government that he's declared a moratorium on any costs associated with his DVDs. He'll even pay the postage. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the store link. Choose from many outstanding DVDs, including The Hoax, Global Warming, A Convenient Lie, Holocaust, Pro-Choice, The Myth of Roe vs. Wade, and more. Visit ironmicrophone.com. Arm yourself with information that will change minds as well as the future of our country. Order the DVDs now while they're free. Do it quickly because this offer is subject to change in 90 days. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the Store tab to order your free DVD today.
Welcome back to the home of the Iron Microphone. We're taking your calls at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
Good morning and welcome back to the program. Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman with you. Most women in the United States identify as religious, and those seeking abortion as are no different. But this is what's really fascinating about this. There is a pro-choice movement or pro-choice faith-based group called Faith Aloud, which seeks both, which basically says that abortion and a woman has a right to choose whether they choose an abortion or they choose not to have an abortion, and they believe that there's a Christian fundamental principle behind that. And with us this morning to talk about that is the Reverend John Dorhauer from Faith Aloud. We welcome you to the program, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you both this morning.
So talk to us just a little bit about Faith Aloud, and you're a Christian group, which most people would identify a Christian group with being anti-abortion and being pro-life. Explain a little bit about your position and how a Christian group would be a proponent of abortion.
Sure. And let me just clear up one misperception. We're actually an interfaith group. We're not a strictly Christian group.
I did notice on your board you have, besides ministers, you have several rabbis and other people on the group.
Correct. And we actually represent in both the Christian and the Jewish faiths on the board a tradition that has been from the foundations of this country known as the Free Church Movement. And there's a radical difference between a faith group, be it Christian or Jewish, where the leaders of the faith define for all of its adherents what they can and cannot believe, what they can and cannot view as moral or immoral. And in the Free Church tradition, and my ancestors came over on the Mayflower escaping religious persecution in England, the fundamental notion is that adherents of the faith have the right to define for them what is moral or immoral, including issues of abortion and reproductive choice.
I just want to ask you, as a reverend and a minister in Christianity, would you say that abortion is moral or immoral?
I would, as my personal response to that would be I'm ambivalent about that. I grew up a Roman Catholic, and I grew up with a clear understanding that abortion as a choice was immoral. But over time, as I've aged and matured a bit, I have to say that personally I'm conflicted, and I've never been faced with that choice. And I'm not sure if faced with that choice what the circumstances would lead me to conclude. I do know this, that I've been in a partnered relationship with my wife for 28 years. I would hope that if pregnant by me, that she would include me in the deliberations, but ultimately I would allow her to make that choice. And so,
well, how do you?
And I can only speak in the tradition from which I come. I can only speak for me, and I don't want to be a part of a religious movement that compels all women to limit their moral choices to my moral sensitivities or sensibilities. Nor do I want my government imposing my religious views on all women.
But it's not religion at all. It's a question of science. I would like to know under what circumstances.
But I'm not a scientist. I am one who is trained as a religious.
Right.
And
well,
so I can
I'm
only
sure,
speak from the context of religion.
All right. Under what context in religion do you see the justification for abortion?
Well, I can think of a number of cases where abortion would be justified.
Okay.
My wife is an RN. In fact, she worked for 8 years as a neonatal nurse at a large hospital in St. Louis and knew of a number of cases where a woman was faced with the difficult and painful choice of terminating the pregnancy or losing her life.
Okay,
I would argue
now
that's a justifiable case for abortion.
Well, no, it's not. You can terminate a pregnancy, if you let me finish. You can terminate a pregnancy without the necessity of the intentional killing of the undelivered infant. The infant may very well die because of extreme prematurity and environmental causes. But the fact of the matter is, in our society today, the vast bulk of abortions are done under the auspices of psychological stress. And the reason that is because psychological stress has no objective parameters, and it is easily stated on by an abortionist prescription of psychological stress. So the point is, yes, a mother may have severe illnesses during pregnancy, which may require a premature delivery of the infant. However, there is nothing that requires the intentional killing of the infant. In our society today, the abortion movement exists not to preserve the life of the mother. It is with the intentional killing of the undelivered infant. And to me, that is the big issue. You seem to, on all of your movement, wants to make it appear that this is a women's rights issue, that this is a reproductive issue, this is a healthcare issue, when actually it is not. Well, it is a political issue.
It's always been a women's rights issue.
It is not a women's rights issue. Because those that are being born also happen to be women. And our Constitution says life cannot be taken without due process. So it is not a women's rights issue at all. It is simply an issue of convenience. But the Supreme Court has also weighed in that life doesn't begin at conception, and that there is a period of time legally. The Supreme Court said that forced sterilization is legal. In 1924, the Supreme Court said that slavery was legal in 1857. The Supreme Court said that segregation was legal in 1896, and they've had a lot of other decisions. If you have read, and I imagine you have read the Roe v. Wade decision, you will find it full of inaccuracies and out-and-out lies. And just because the Supreme Court says something does not make it so, does not make it true.
But it does make it the law of the land, and until that is changed, the Supreme Court has weighed in.
The law of the land,
the constitutional right for a woman to choose will be upheld.
It is not there. There is no constitutional right. Where in the Constitution, in your reading of those decisions, in the Griswold versus Connecticut, in the Roe v. Wade decision and other decisions, where in the Constitution does it give the right of the woman to kill the undelivered infant? Where in the Constitution is that given?
Well, it's not specifically written into the Constitution. The job of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution and determine whether or not laws and rights.
The job of the Supreme Court is not to interpret the Constitution, and there is nothing in the Constitution. There is nothing in the Constitution which gives the Supreme Court the right to interpret the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution is the authority to interpret the Constitution given the Supreme Court. They usurped that authority in the Marbury versus Madison decision, but the fact of the matter is they have no right to interpret the Constitution.
Well, you and I will disagree about that.
We can disagree all we want, but you have some facts which... Then the American people are the voice of the nation. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. That is
by and large, the population of the U.S. Agrees that women have a right both to reproductive choice and
not true.
Access to abortion.
That is not true. That is not true. The majority of Americans are opposed to abortion on demand. And just a popularity contest doesn't make something right. There's popularity contests and
you're popularity the one that said the American people has the right to choose. You want to call it demean it and call it a popularity contest. But that's what a democracy is.
Yes, I will call it a popularity contest. That is not what democracy is, and we live in a republic. In a republic under the Constitution. We are not a democracy like Athens, in which we take a referendum and we go based upon that. In those situations, we end up in Nazi Germany, where the law says it's okay to ostracize Jews.
Which is why the Supreme Court has the authority to speak.
The Supreme Court does not have the authority to do that, and I wish you'd quit saying things for which you have no basis. You can spout that all you want. The Supreme Court has absolutely no authority to do any of its decisions that it has. It is not allowed to amend the Constitution. The amendment process excludes
allowed to
Supreme
amend
Court.
the Constitution.
It is not allowed to legislate
interpret
either.
the Constitution.
It is not
and
allowed to interpret. Nowhere in the powers of the court, it's a very short, a half a page long. Nowhere in the powers of the court does the word interpret the Constitution exist. In fact, the defender of the Constitution is actually written in the executive branch. There's nothing in the judiciary branch of their powers which says they have the power or the authority to interpret the Constitution. Nowhere does it say that.
We disagree.
Okay.
It's not. Wait a second. Wait, you can't go ahead and read it. And you show me where it says that the Supreme Court has the power to interpret the Constitution. It's not a question of agreeing or disagreeing. It's not there. It's black and white. You can read it. Anyone can read it for themselves. It's not a question of agreeing or disagreeing. It's either there or it's not. The same way there is no right to privacy in the Constitution either. And I guess we could say we could disagree on that. But if you can find me somewhere in the Constitution where the term right to privacy exists, I would be very interested in that.
But obviously, the words right to privacy don't exist. I won't argue with that. However, I would argue that as Americans, we do have a right to privacy, and most of us would agree.
You can't make a blanket statement like that. Who are you to make a statement? The Constitution, they did not forget.
It wasn't a blanket
not to put
statement.
a right to
I said I would argue that we have a right to privacy. It's not a blanket statement. I'm telling you what I believe. And
on what basis? The Constitution actually says there is no right to privacy. The Constitution
Do you
says
believe that the government has the right to put a camera in your bedroom?
What kind of a question
Do you believe
is
that the government has the authority to question what you do in the privacy of your bedroom?
The Constitution
says...
says...
There's a fundamental right to privacy.
That is not true. The Constitution says the American people have a right to be secure in their own personal effects. They do not have a right to privacy. And under warrant, if there's a warrant by a court, then if they want to put a camera in your room...
With probable cause.
Which, of course, is with probable cause. It says with probable cause, then they can do that.
The requirement of probable cause presumes a right to privacy.
That does not presume a right to privacy. That is completely inaccurate. It does not. It simply does not. If there was a right to privacy, they would have written a right to privacy. There are rights in the Constitution which are delineated. There is no right to privacy. What, do you think they forgot? Do you think it was an omission? Do you think the Founding Fathers just, oh, gosh, we forgot about that. There is no right to privacy purposefully and specifically because there cannot be a right to privacy.
That the Founding Fathers wrote everything into the Constitution. That's what the amendments are for. Because there were things that were not written into the Constitution that we have come to conclude we have a right to expect. So
that is absolutely not true.
That it wasn't originally written into the Constitution doesn't mean that we don't have the right to argue for it today.
It is simply untrue. It is simply untrue. The Constitution was written creating a definite relationship between the government and the people that was meant to be unchanging. And so it was not an open...
That's what amendments are for, is to amendments change the Constitution.
Amendments are to modify, not to change. Amendments are to modify, not to change. Look up what amendment means.
To modify is to change.
Amendment is to modify. To change means to reverse or to undo. Amendment means to modify. Amendment means does not... You can only modify it. You cannot change it. Change does not mean modify.
Okay.
I just wanted to get back. I just wanted to ask you a question, Reverend. You said your background is Roman Catholic. You're a Christian group.
He's not a Christian group. You already said that.
Well, you're
we're an interfaith. I'm personally.
But your background is Christian.
Yes, correct.
And so and from the background for your Christian teaching is that life begins at conception, and so how do you?
That's not universally held.
Why doesn't life begin
across the board?
Of course it is. Of course it is. Otherwise, you're not a Christian.
No. I'm telling you.
Oh yeah.
I'm a Christian.
Well, you're not. You're not a Christian because Christians believe that life is
well, I
at
thank
conception.
you for clarifying that for me.
Well, good, because you need a clarification.
Rabbi, can we go back to your question?
Well,
this is
part
we're
of
just
the
going to
question.
stay on this.
This is part of the question.
I want you to distinguish between the moment of conception and the infant that is delivered. What is the difference between what is the difference between the embryo and the delivered infant?
One is a sentient being and one is not.
So so an embryo is not a being. What is it?
No,
I
didn't say being. I said a sentient being.
You're telling me an infant of just born is a sentient being and distinct from. And who are you to decide when sentient is? What about 3 months? That's
my point.
Sentient?
It's not me to decide. Every woman has
the right.
Oh, no,
you have decided. Oh, no, that is not true. And you have decided.
Well,
you have decided
true,
that
our
it is not a sentient.
Government says that it's true, that a woman has the right to choose.
That is not true. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that. And a fascist government can say whatever it wants. You are not a Christian.
Reverend, thank you so much. Our time is up. Thank you for being on the program. We'll continue right after this break, right here on the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone.
You are listening to the Talkback Radio Network. We hope you're being enriched by our program today. You may be listening via our archives or to our live broadcast. Dr. Gelman and Rabbi Rosenberg broadcast live on Thursdays from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern, 10 to 11 a.m. Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. You may call the show live during those times, toll free at 888-930-1787, 888-930-1787, or you can find us in the archives 24/7 at ironmicrophone.com.
Welcome to today's lottery drawing. And today's winning numbers are not yours, not yours, and another number that's not yours. And the final number is not yours.
When it comes to having money, don't rely on luck. Brew your own coffee at home instead of buying that latte. Brown bag it to work instead of ordering it. Go to feedthepig.org for more free ideas on how to save. Feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Ad Council.
Dr. Lawrence Gelman is a South Texas-based physician and hospital administrator. His mission is to empower Americans with knowledge that will help change the direction of our country. Dr. Gelman has produced a series of DVDs with the facts on myriad political, social, and economic issues. At this time, he is so passionate about our country and the state of our government that he's declared a moratorium on any costs associated with his DVDs. He'll even pay the postage. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the store link. Choose from many outstanding DVDs, including The Hoax, Global Warming, A Convenient Lie, Holocaust, Pro-Choice, The Myth of Roe vs. Wade, and more. Visit ironmicrophone.com. Arm yourself with information that will change minds as well as the future of our country. Order the DVDs now while they're free. Do it quickly because this offer is subject to change in 90 days. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the store tab to order your free DVD today.
You're listening to the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone. Our telephone lines are open at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
Back to the program here, Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman with you. This is why we call this program the Iron Microphone, because it also delineates things to ultimate truth. And I just have to take exception with our guest. With respect, now, I'm a rabbi, not a Christian, but Christianity believes life begins at conception. If you're a Christian, you believe that. We had a fundamental difference on that point, but that was what I learned when I took comparative religion.
The eugenics movement in the United States is based on the principle that there are some superior to others. Our Supreme Court consists of 9 members, 6 of whom came out of Harvard Law School, 2 came out of Yale Law School, and 1 came out of Columbia with early part of her law training in Harvard. Well, that sounds egalitarian, right? I mean, at least we had three different law schools. Of course, they were all located about 100 miles apart from each other. And so is that what the Founding Fathers anticipated, that a bunch of Ivy League individuals would determine what the Constitution meant? There's nothing in the Constitution and the powers of the judiciary which gives the Supreme Court authority over the interpretation of the Constitution. In fact, there's a legislative process in the Constitution. It involves the President and both houses of Congress. It does not include the Supreme Court. There is an amendment process delineated in the Constitution. It involves the Congress and the states. It does not include the Supreme Court. If the Founding Fathers had thought that the Supreme Court would determine whether something was constitutional or not, then why didn't they put that in the Constitution itself? Doesn't it seem odd to you that right now for a Supreme Court to declare a case or a law unconstitutional requires an individual or group to present a case through the court system, getting to the Supreme Court where they make that decision? Does that make any sense? Wouldn't it be more logical if the Founding Fathers said, we're going to allow these lawyers to determine what is constitutional? Wouldn't it have made sense to submit the completed legislation to the Supreme Court prior to implementation and said, is this constitutional or not? Wouldn't that have made more sense? If our Founding Fathers really had intended the judiciary to interpret the Constitution, would that not have been the process? Right now, the process is a bill is created in one house, and then the other house acts on it, modifies it, or whatever, and you have to send an identical bill to the president. The president can sign it or veto. If he's vetoed, it can be overturned by 2/3 of the House and the Senate, and then it gets into law. Now, let me ask you: wouldn't it make more sense that if the Founding Fathers had thought that the Supreme Court should be involved in legislation and determine the constitutionality of a law, wouldn't it have made more sense to have the completed bill given to the Supreme Court and said, "Hey guys, do you think this is constitutional or not?" Wouldn't that have made more sense? Well, and what we have now?
Well, it sounds like, yes, but it sounds like at this point, what we have, and getting back to one thing that the guest had mentioned, just because the court says something, the Nazis said in the early 1940s that sterilization was fine. That, go ahead.
Wait a second. We said that in the United States as well. In 1927, the Bell versus Beck decision,
that's right,
written by anti-Semite and racist Oliver Wendell Holmes, who, interestingly, our worst Supreme Court justices are considered the greatest. Yeah. Why? Because they're the ones who gave the government the most power. He said, and the Supreme Court said, that forced sterilization was legal.
That's right. And now, and so our Supreme Court also said that slavery at one point was legal.
Yeah, let's disabuse ourselves of this nonsense about the sanctity of physicians. Let's look at Nazi physicians, okay? First of all, this Rudin was a psychiatrist. He was a physician. He's the one that set up the structure for the elimination of the Jews. Of course, we all know that Nazi doctors experimented on all kinds of individuals against their will. We also know that Russian doctors incarcerated dissidents into psychiatric hospitals in the Soviet Union. We also know, and if this isn't an ironic tragedy, I don't know what is, that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology submitted an amicus brief in support of partial birth abortions, saying that it was the right of the woman to determine when and where and under what circumstance she could kill her completely innocent offspring. A partial birth abortion is called a partial birth abortion because the baby is already being delivered at the time of the abortion. Now, we need to change terminology. Abortion does not mean killing of an infant. Abortion means the termination of a process before its completion. You can have an abortion of pregnancy, which is a preterm delivery of the infant, without killing the infant. The abortion of life. The abortion of life is the cutting short of life unnaturally. That is the abortion of life. And what the Supreme Court tried to do is put the two things together and say that abortion is the process of terminating pregnancy with something other than a live birth. That is not the definition of abortion. The great lie of the abortion movement is they try to make it seem that it is a woman's health care issue, when in fact the purpose of abortion in the United States and everywhere else in the world is the intentional killing of the undelivered infant for the convenience of the mother. Now, partial birth abortion, why do they call partial birth? Because technically speaking, according to the law, get this, because the head remains inside the uterus at the time of the murdering of the infant. Oh. That is still considered technically a fetus and not a newborn. And so therefore, they can puncture the skull of the infant and suction out the brains, killing the infant. And that is legal if a state decides that it wants to be legal. The Supreme Court decision said if a state says that is not to be permitted, the state has the right to ban that procedure within a state. And interestingly, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is the body of physicians that delivers life into the world, actually took the time to write a letter to the Supreme Court defending the use of partial birth abortions in the birth control pantheon of process.
And these are babies that could live outside the womb at that.
They are
that
full
time.
term. They are full term.
So these are babies that are coming out at 9 months?
Yes, these are full term, and the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology supported that procedure. That is nothing short of murder.
What is the difference of them doing that? You know, I mean, it was pretty graphic, puncturing their skull and sucking the brains out. What's the difference of them doing that when they take the baby out of the mother and do it there? I mean,
it's only a technical difference. The technical difference is the law says that is now a human being.
It's a human being, no matter if it's...
Except, of course, you read in the British Journal of Medical Ethics an article in February in the British Journal of Medical Ethics that said it was ethical to kill an infant after birth if the parents did not like the looks of the kid. And so they could, and there's in the United States, there are philosophers, was it Peter Singer of Princeton, that says that an infant of 30 days is not a sentient, just what the term that what he was, is not a sentient human being, and therefore, if the parents wish to destroy that infant, they should be allowed to do so legally. There is no physiologic difference of any consequence between an infant with the head in the uterus about to be delivered and 1 second later. There is obviously no difference. So 1 second later, you cannot kill, but 1 second earlier, you're legally allowed to kill. Legal and legitimate are not the same. And the other thing I think we need to take issue with is this relativism that says whatever you think is right should be right, and there is no absolute right and wrong. That is a bunch of hogwash and a bunch of nonsense. That is animal thinking. Human beings understand that there are such things as right and wrong, and any group that considers itself religious and to say there is no right and wrong and there is no morality, that's not really a religious group, is it? Because what is the basis of religion? Morals. The very basis of religion is there is a right, there is a wrong, there is a moral standard.
You know, I have to tell you something. If you use that same analogy and that same idea of this baby having the brains sucked out, and you applied that to an animal, and it was heard there was somebody doing that, the ASPCA would be all over it.
Well, if you go out there and crush a turtle egg,
that's right,
with an embryo in it, that's also against the law. So you can kill. So if you kill a turtle embryo in the egg, you can be fined or go to jail. But if you kill a human being,
that's okay.
In the womb, that's legal. And of course, as you said very aptly, legal does not make it right. In Germany, look. A German and an American, we're the same. There are Germans in the United States, and Germany is an ally of the United States. Those people created a law that said that German Jews are less than human. How is that different than what this gentleman was saying, that an in utero infant is less than human? Because that's what he was saying, wasn't he? And so we look at the Nazis as some kind of horrific group, and they were, of course, but we have killed 60 million Americans since 1973. And speaking of Jews, in Israel since 1976, 1.5 million Jewish infants have been murdered by their mothers with the help of their doctors, which is more Jewish children than Adolf Hitler killed.
Well, the thing that I took great exception to this Reverend talking about this idea of sentience, is that, does that mean that if a child who is born, who, say, has Down syndromes or is severely mentally challenged or has a horrible kind of disease that maybe, is this child's never going to be able to talk or be able to perceive things, does that mean this child doesn't have sentience, and so that we should just get rid of it?
Well, that's a slippery slope, because where do you draw the line? We all have different levels of intelligence for one reason or another. And so are we going to have a society that says, well, you have to have a minimum level of intelligence in order to be allowed to survive? I mean, who's going to make that decision? Clearly, the government is going to make that decision. And, of course, everybody in the government, and they'll tell you themselves. I mean, there's no government official in the world that won't tell you how much smarter they are than the average person. And, of course, if you don't believe them, there's a firing squad waiting for you. So it's just a bunch of nonsense. We live in a world of lies promoted by the government with the ulterior motivation of strengthening the government and enslaving the American people. Because in a country that does not believe in the sanctity of life, in any country that says that abortion is legal, obviously does not believe in the sanctity of life. And if a government, and if you don't believe in the sanctity of life, then what is sacred? If there's no right to life, then what value is any other right? In fact, every right, if you look at every right that we have, it is based upon a right to life. But every right flows from the basic right to life. If there is no right to life, all other rights are absolutely meaningless.
You go back, I was talking off air to you about this quote that you had mentioned before about Lothrop Stoddard, who was a founding board member of the Birth Control League, which became Planned Parenthood. And by the way, they changed the name to Planned Parenthood because
their affiliation with the Nazis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Most people don't know that.
No, and why is that? The television is on 24 hours a day. You can watch Fox News and CNN, other tripe for 24 hours a day, and never is any of this brought forward.
Now, only on this is the only show you'll hear this. But Stoddard, who met with Adolf Hitler several times and went over there and personally witnessed how the Nazis were, as he said, weeding out the worst strains in the Germanic stock in a scientific and truly humanitarian way.
Sure. I mean, look what they consider scientific. A lot of what we hear of so-called science today is a bunch of garbage, which is just the government trying to get control over your lives using so-called experts. I mean, look at all the experts that the government brings forth to justify their pro-abortion stances that they have.
And what's interesting is that it goes on. This is a very interesting article about Stoddard. It goes on that a lot of his writings in the 1930s were picked up by Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels took his writings, Stoddard's writings, and used them in Nazi school textbooks.
Everything that the Nazis know about eugenics and everything that they promoted was based on the eugenics movement, and among whom was of course Lothrop Stoddard and Margaret Sanger, as well as the father of Averell Harriman, Henry Harriman, who was one of the big funders of the eugenics movement in the United States.
It goes on and on.
It all comes from. I think it's important when you understand that the abortion movement springs from the eugenics movement, in that there are some who deserve to live and there are some who don't deserve to live, and it all stems from the divine right of kings, which is the antithesis of what this country stands for. And the divine right of kings says that there are some that are born superior, as Lothrop Stoddard said, and those who are born inferior. And interestingly enough, that goes on for generations, so that the progeny of the aristocracy that is going to be born 100 years from now is going to be given the power to rule over the progeny of the so-called inferior classes that are going to be born 100 years from now. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Look at the great people of our society: Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Michael Dell. Who could have predicted any of them? No one, certainly nobody in the government. If you go to the elitist schools of the Northeast, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, any of those others, they are taught daily in their classes that by birthright they are superior to the rest of the nation and that they have an obligation to control the lives of everyone else in the country. That is what they are told, and that is why we have arrogant snot kids like Barack Obama, Timothy Geithner, Larry Summers, and all the rest of them that think that they have some God-given, I don't know, you can't use God with them, right? You know, some natural right to dictate to you and to me and to all other American citizens lesser born as to how we should live our lives.
I'm having a hard time getting this image of this partial birth abortion out of my head. I have to be honest with you. This whole idea of what you said about the crushing of the skull or the taking out of the brains or how they puncture the skull while it's in utero. And we wrap it around such a nice word, partial birth abortion. The problem is this child could live outside the womb.
That's a human being. Imagine doing that to a newborn baby just delivered. Imagine someone going into the nursery, sticking a spike into the back of their skull, and that must hurt, and then suctioning out the brains, and then taking a big clamp and then crushing the skull. That's murder. And that's exactly what these so-called physicians are doing in a partial birth abortion. The ones that Hillary Clinton and all the rest tried to defend. Oh, by the way, Hillary Clinton is quoted as saying that she considers Margaret Sanger, the eugenist, anti-Semite, racist, as among her heroines, with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was also an anti-Semite racist, married to anti-Semite racist Franklin Roosevelt.
It is amazing when you think about all this, and then we have guests on we've had the last couple weeks who defend this and will defend, and you have people in Congress, liberal Democrats who will defend. No, a woman has a right to choose to murder her child.
As if the infant has no right to life, which, of course, the Constitution does not say you have a right to life only after you're born. That is not what it says. I just want to reiterate one statement in our last minute here. I find it tragically ironic that the representatives from the black, Hispanic, and Jewish community are the ones that are the biggest proponents of Planned Parenthood, the biggest supporters of Planned Parenthood, when Planned Parenthood was an organization created specifically to reduce and eliminate the births of blacks, Hispanics, and Jews.
It is a tragic way to end this program to a certain extent, that these were the people who were the greatest victims, and they're the ones that are supporting these kinds of activities.
Just because you're born with black or red or brown or yellow doesn't mean that you are a human being and that you support the benefits of those people.